So here's a quick lesson on looking at the information processing part of the course, and specifically we're looking at reaction time and relating this into information processing as part of the ASP unit for OCR. Now if we think of a simple information processing model with the three items that we see as on screen there, our input leading into the decision that will be made, and then that leading into the actual movement to be produced, i.e. the output. Now, in order for all this to occur, there has to be some form of stimulus at the start which the performer has to respond to. It might be in a 100-meter race, the stimulus of the gun going off to eventually lead to the output of the race being run. That stimulus is going to feed into our sensory systems. So whether we hear, see, smell or touch that stimulus, we will be reacting to that, and initially we've got to take that information in through our sensory system. Once that's happened, that message will have to be conveyed to the brain, and the brain is the part of the body which is going to take in and interpret that information and then decide what to do with that information. That will eventually lead to some form of movement, and to initiate that the brain will send a message to these muscles for them to produce the output. Now that's the process of information processing, and reaction time depends heavily on four things which will lead to an effective reaction. The first one being the time it takes for that stimulus to activate the sensory system to be used. So in our example of the 100 meters, we'll be looking at the gun stimulus, the time it takes for the individual to actually hear the gun. Once the gun's been heard, our next thing that influences reaction time is the time that it will take for that stimulus to travel from the sensory system which has taken it in to the brain. Third thing is the time it takes for the brain to process the stimulus. In the case of our example of the 100 meters, this is obviously just hearing the gun and then realizing that movement has to be produced. The final thing which will influence our reaction time is the time it will take for the relevant commands to be sent from our central mechanism, the brain, to the relevant working muscles. So those four things are the four factors which will affect our reaction time, and the diagram in front of you shows how it all fits into information processing. Now, within this part of the course, it's important to understand a few definitions, reaction time being one of them. Looking specifically at our example of a 100-meter sprint, the stimulus, as we've explained, will be the onset of the gun going off. We then have to initiate movement by pushing against our start blocks. Finally, the race will be run until we'd reach the finish line, crossing in our finishing time. Now the time it takes from the onset of the stimulus, e.g. the gun going off, to the initiation of movement, when you begin to push against the blocks, that is known as our reaction time. The time then from when you've initiated movement to completion of the movement, that's going from when you've started pushing against the blocks to crossing the finish line, that's known as movement time. Now our third definition is response time, which is the reaction time and the movement time put together. So in our example of the 100-meter sprint, it'll be the onset of the stimulus, the gun going off, to the time until we cross the finish line. Now these three definitions for reaction time, movement time and response time are crucial in our understanding of reaction time within information processing.